Hello average engineers. Today I wanted to do a video on how to make an open source Python package. I recently made one in about maybe 2 hours the other weekend, and I thought maybe this would be a good chance for me to talk about why and how and give you the exact steps you would need to take if you wanted to build your first open source Python package that's available on PyPI for anyone to download. If you go to PyPI.org, you can search Lake Scum. Lake Scum is the name of the open source package I built this weekend in just 2 hours. And I think the first thing you need to do when you want to build your first open source project and try it out, try the whole workflow from end to end, would be you need to have a problem that needs solving. And it doesn't have to be some huge project. I think that's where a lot of people get caught up. They think they need to build some huge, massive code base, when in reality, a lot of the packages that we use every day are simple. They're just kind of automating things that maybe you do every day or other people do every day. So it's really just about coming up with a simple problem at first, a solution you think you can solve. In my case, I recently had a problem with Databricks where I was trying to read Delta Lake tables in Unity Catalog, which is Databricks' proprietary, data governance thingy. And, of course, a lot of the tutorials and stuff you can read, there's a Delta Lake package, Polars, and like DuckDB now. Like Polars, for example, you can read Delta Lakes directly, Delta Lake tables directly with Polars, except it doesn't really work very well if you're using Unity Catalog. The same goes for DuckDB or PyArrow. Turns out there's a lot of versioning issues. It turns out, for example, if you want to read a Polars table in Unity Catalog, you got to do some Spark SQL, get the location on S3 if that's where that table is stored at. You actually have to use credentials and try to read the table, and depending on the table version, it throws a lot of errors. The Delta Lake version, and it was a nightmare, and I couldn't believe it. And I said, man, this is a problem for people who just want a simply and easily one-liner. I just want to read a Delta Lake table in Unity Catalog and read it with Polars, for example. Why should it be that hard? So that's what I did. That was my problem that I came up with. Now, the first thing you want to do if you're creating a brand new project and you want it to eventually be on PyPI as a Python package, open source, is use a tool called Poetry. It's kind of like a build tool and a dependency management tool for Python. I mean, I don't like it that much, but it's one of the best options out there. It's kind of a pain, but if you are going to use your Python package as an open source project in the future and you want to publish it to PyPI, I suggest using something like Poetry to do that. The first thing you can do is just Poetry new and then write the name of your package like I did. And it kind of like basically gives you a template of everything you need. Some of the stuff that shows up, it'll give you PyProject 2 YAML file. It'll give you Poetry lock. You'll see some other stuff. It just kind of creates a test folder. It creates a folder with the name of the project that you wanted with an init file inside it. And this is where a lot of your code can go. And eventually we'll be able to publish directly from Poetry with Poetry to PyPI. Of course, you need to set up an account on PyPI and get those credentials so you can easily publish your project later. The first thing I usually do when starting on open source projects is start with writing a good README. If you want people to actually use your tool, you need a good README that kind of explains what the tool is and how to use it. In my example, I went on ChatGPT, made a nice little image, and then I put a really quick description in. This is a Python package to help Databricks Unity Catalog users read and query Delta Lake tables with Polars, DuckDB, or PyArrow. And of course, you can pip install it with Lake Scum. So that's kind of the first thing I do is I start writing the README, even though I haven't maybe even done the programming yet. I will write the README and get it all ready and looking nice so people actually want to use it. And then examples of how to use it are key. Of course, you can do that after you've written the code. So in my case, writing this open source Python package, the next step after getting the project set up with Poetry is to actually write the code. You write the README, you get a little idea of what you want to do. The next thing is to actually write the code. In my case, I knew I needed 3 functions, one for Polars, one for DuckDB, and one for PyArrow. And I knew that this is a tool specifically for working inside Unity Catalog on Databricks. And I wanted just one function if somebody wants to get a Polars data frame from a Delta Lake table in Unity Catalog. What's the easiest function I can write to take away the work of them having to do too much? Very simple. Let's look at the first one. The first function I called Unity Catalog delta to polars. It takes a Spark session. That would obviously, if you're working inside Databricks, you'll have a Spark session, the table name. So the table name, the Unity Catalog table name that you're wanting. Then I actually have an optional SQL filter. So if it's a large table and it has partitions things or clustering things like that, just giving people the option to pass basically a where clause in. One of the things I decided to do, even though I didn't like it, was basically in Spark there's a toPandas function that can take any Spark data frame and turn it into a Pandas data frame, and that's basically how I'm taking away that work for people. I'm just making it invisible. So people pass in Spark a table name, an optional SQL filter. If they have a SQL filter or they don't, I have some logic to deal with that. Then basically you do a select statement on that table, turned into a data frame, optionally using a where clause, turn it into a Pandas data frame, and then taking that Pandas data frame, of course, tools like Polars or PyArrow, for example, they have basically methods where they allow you to create, say, a Polars data frame from Pandas. So I can, right here, I'm saying Polars from Pandas, passing the Pandas data frame, return the Polars data frame. In the case of DuckDB, what you're really doing is you're registering a table so DuckDB can use it. Just a side note that using Arrow enabled, this makes turning the Spark data frame into a Pandas data frame much faster because it uses PyArrow on the back end. Obviously for DuckDB, I did some testing. I just wanted to make sure it took a large enough sample to figure out what the data set types are. And then what I'm doing in DuckDB is just doing the same thing, selecting out that data frame with an optional where clause, and I'm registering that data frame as a different table name. That's what I ask people to pass. Pass the name of the table you want to reference in DuckDB. Once it happens, it just registers that data frame. And the same thing for PyArrow. And so how do people actually use it? And you go back to the README. So if you're using Polars, for example, you can go to the README. It tells you here's the parameters you need to pass. Here's a example of using it. You pass it Spark, you pass it Unity Catalog and table name as long with a SQL filter, and you basically get a Polars data frame back that you can print. And I tested all these again with DuckDB, the same thing, except you're just registering the table, and then you can go ahead, you can see in the example that you can get results by querying that data frame with DuckDB. Pretty cool and pretty simple. So after you've done all that, written all your code and got it ready to go, you've updated your README, things like that, what you'll do with Poetry then is, of course, remember, you're going to have to set up a account on PyPI, which is easy and free. Once you've got those credentials set up, you can just type Poetry build, and what'll happen is it'll build, basically, you'll see a DST show up, and that'll basically be all the stuff you need to publish to PyPI. That's why you should use Poetry, because it kind of does it for you. If you open the PyProject 2 YAML, you can kind of see the name of the thing. You can add a description. You can add your name as the author, things like that. You can see the dependencies. That's another thing with Poetry, makes adding dependencies easy. You can just say Poetry add Polars, Poetry add Delta Lake, Poetry add DuckDB, things like that. So once you've done the build and it's built, and once it's done running and built those files, all you have to do is type Poetry publish, and it will actually publish that change and that PyPI package out onto the PyPI website. For example, you can go, here's mine, Lakescum 0.1.3 version. Of course, I pushed a couple versions that basically pulls in your README automatically, and now you basically can pip install your Python package from anywhere. Pretty cool, pretty easy. Again, if you ever wanted to make changes and republish your package with a new version, you'd go ahead and make code changes. You would come into this version here and you'd change the version. It starts at 0.1.0, and you could say 0.1.2, 0.1.3, do another build, Poetry publish. It pushes out your Python package, and wham, anybody can use it with pip install, whatever. In my case, pip install Lakescum. For anyone that can do it. I tested it on Databricks Unity Catalog on a notebook. It worked fine. It worked great. I tested all the features and everything. It works perfectly, and it's easy. I think the key here is sometimes it can seem like black magic working in open source, making your own package. It seems like, oh man, how could I ever do that? Well, it's pretty easy. I mean, how many lines of code? We got 42 lines of code is all it took. Installing Poetry, just running a couple commands is it, running a couple tests and publishing, and wham, I have a very easy Python package that's open source out there. It's in my GitHub as well. You know, it kind of gives you a feel for what it's like to work in open source. You can have other people collaborate with it. Usually over time, people add features, request features, things like that. It's just a great learning tool, and absolutely anyone can make an open source package.